Well, I always live from day to day. I always thought that I never worried about the future. The future would take care of itself. See? The past is history. My name is Jesse Rolnick. I'm 102 years old. I was born on October 17th, 1912.
What made you decide to take part in this program to be interviewed?
I was asked to do it, and it would be a new experience for me, and I'm willing to try anything new. So I'm going along with it.
Have you always been interested in anything new?
Yes, I just go with the flow. I don't do anything out of my comfort zone.
What's in your comfort zone?
I do anything I want to do within reason. I don't try to do anything that's beyond my scope of doing things. I've learned to live within my ability to do what I want to do when I want to do it. So I don't have any thoughts about the future. I don't know what the future holds for me. The end is probably in sight, but I'm not ready yet. So.
How do you know you're not ready?
Because of the way I feel. I don't feel sick. I don't feel tired. The only problem I have is the problem with my eyesight. If it weren't for my eyesight, I'd be perfectly fine. I could do things that I did 10 years ago without even worrying about it. I had a problem all my life of looking young for my age. To compound that problem, I graduated from the 8th grade when I was 12 years old. Now, when I was 12, I looked more like the average 8-year-old, so that I was always a misfit with the rest of the class.
How did you handle that?
As best I could. As best I could. The fact of the matter is, when I was growing up now, I have to go back to my parents. Both my parents were immigrants. My father came to this country when he was 5 years old. My mother came to the United States when she was 1.5 years old. My mother was the oldest of 9 children. The other 8 were born here. Neither of my parents had any education at all. I don't think my father ever got past the 3rd grade. He was a street kid. He hustled, sold newspapers, did whatever he had to do in those days. My mother was the oldest of 9 children. She was the built-in housemaid. So my mother was a tyrant. She raised the family. My father did very little. He just worked his fanny off to earn enough money to keep food on the table, and that was about it. We didn't have too many luxuries when I was a kid growing up.
So when you realized that you had some gifts, that for your age, sounds like you were very smart, when did you realize that you could do something?
Actually, I never realized it just happened. I started, like I say, I graduated from Jane Monroe High School when I was 16. College was out of the question. There was just simply no money. So at age 16, I went out into the job market. And like I said, well, I was 16. I probably looked like a 12-year-old. And after going to an employment agency and being sent out on at least 6 interviews, which I was turned down for, I finally ran into this woman an Irish woman who ran a small New York office for a Massachusetts children's hosiery firm. And they had a small stock room to service the New York stores or whatever it was, and that's how I started. This woman took me under her wing and taught me the children's hosiery business, how it was made, how it this, how that. It was like going to school all over again. And it was a great basic education for me, if you didn't realize it. The problem was that that job started in 1929, February of 29, and then the market crashed that September. It didn't take long before they closed that office down and I was out of a job again. Now I had been taught the children's hosiery business. So I went out in the market and looked for a job with other children's hosiery firms. And I finally landed a job with Leroy Hosiery Company. And that was in 1931, I think. And I just sort of inched my way up the ladder. Started in 1931 at the very bottom.
At what point did you marry?
I got married in 1935.
How old were you and how old was your wife?
I was 24 and a half, my wife was 20. We were 4.5 years apart. That's a strange thing that you should ask me, because we worked for the same company. And I had never paid any attention to her. I'd been out of the road as a salesman for about a year. She was one of the girls in the office. And it was the 4th of July weekend. And it was a Friday afternoon, and I was leaving the office. My parents had a cottage out at the shore, out of Far Rockaway. And I was waiting for the elevator to go down, and she was waiting for the elevator to go down. We went down in the elevator together. Now, I hadn't spoken more than 3 words to her prior to this. And we both walked out of the edge of the building. We turned left to go up 33rd Street to Penn Station, and she was walking alongside of me. And we got into a conversation, discovered that we would walk on to Penn Station to take the Long Island Railroad. She was going to Far Rockaway, I was going to Edgemere. And in that 10-minute walk between the office and Penn Station, I fell in love. That was the beginning of our romance. A year later, we were married. My wife never met a stranger. She had the ability to walk into a crowded room of 100 people at a convention. She didn't know a soul in that room when she walked in. By the end of the evening, everybody in that room knew Helen Rolnick.
Well, then, by association, did everybody know you by the end of the evening?
Yeah, by association. Okay. We made a deal. My deal was to bring in the money. Helen's deal was to make all the friends. So, we never had a problem. If someone ever told me that I'd leave the office on a Friday afternoon and be in love by the time I got to Penn Station, I'd tell them they were out of their mind. But that's what happened. And it's a love affair that lasted 67 years. And I climbed the ladder pretty rapidly, because in 1935, the company decided to expand their operations. They were a children's hosiery outfit, selling primarily to New England and Pennsylvania and the Midwest. They hadn't sold anything nationally. And they decided to put a sales force on, and they picked me to go south. So in July of 1935, I started on the road as a salesman.
What was your first impression of the South?
It was difficult because it was a completely new world. Being born in New York, I came down south. Now this is the South in 1935, with segregation, and the whole bit. And I It took me a long time to learn the way the South operated. I ran into signs posted on the wall of a restaurant or a private club, and the sign, to be crude about it, the sign said, "No niggers or Jews allowed." And that was the Deep South in 1935. It's a complete new world for me, you know. Being brought up in New York, we didn't have those problems. And, you know, I learned very rapidly that I had to adjust to their way of life.
Was there anything that offended you about the Southern culture then?
Not really. I never quite understood the way of life of the so-called underclass, you know, the blacks in the mid-1930s had a miserable way of life, you know. And, I learned to adjust to it. In fact, I've been scolded many times by native Southerners that I was too good to the blacks. You know, don't treat them so well. They don't know that you treat them so well, they'll forget their position. You know.
What was your response to that?
I sort of ignored it. I, you know, never made an issue of it because to make an issue of it would have been detrimental to me. I just went with the flow. You know, you learn to adjust to their way of life. I probably treated the blacks that I came in contact with a lot better than the native Southerners treated them, but you know, so that was it. I made mostly the so-called major and secondary cities.
Well, when
Made the first trip by train and bus, which was a murder, with a personal bag and 2 sample cases, 3 pieces of luggage, going by bus and train. But it was a good experience. The next stage was to get myself a car and travel the territory by car instead of by train and bus.
what was the reaction of most people you came in contact with when they found out that you were from New York?
I learned very quickly to adjust. You know, I lost a New York accent as quickly as possible. I found that Southerners, by and large, were very hospitable. I had virtually no problem fitting in. In fact, I made an awful lot of friends very, very quickly.
What were your career goals then?
My career goals were real simple. I had a job, I had a new territory with a new line, and I had to create enough volume to make it lucrative for both me and for the company. I found that along the line, no one ever taught me how to sell. And along the line, I discovered that if people trusted you, you could sell them anything. So the primary concern I had was to build up trust. And customers used to marvel at me because I would tell them that they didn't need a certain item, that they had this and this and this, and putting the 4th item in was just building up stock that you really didn't need. And a lot of the customers couldn't go with the fact that I was a salesman, I wasn't trying to sell them anything. Little they suspect that, you know, I'd always managed to get an extra style on the order by suggesting that, well, now you had this and this, but now you need something like this to round out your selection. And most times they followed my advice. And it became the point where we had a mutual trust.
How did you reconcile for yourself that you were working with people, building trust with people who had so much hatred for a segment of the population?
It was a way of life. I don't think they had hatred for him. I think it was just the line was drawn, and that was a way of life. You know, in fact, many white merchants and people that I know treated their black help very well. They, the help really enjoyed working for certain people. I don't know how to say this. It was the so-called underclass that hated the blacks. The middle class and the upper class did actually hate them. They used the blacks for their benefit, but it was a mutual thing. I found that many black people considered it part of the family in a lot of white businesses. The change took place very gradual. In fact, it didn't really change until 1966. And I happened to be sitting at the counter in Woolworth's the same afternoon that the 5 black boys sat at the counter and waited to be served, and created this whole uproar.
What did you witness?
I witnessed the 5 young blacks sitting at the counter and the police coming in and telling them they had to move. And when they didn't move, they were forcibly ejected from the premises. In 1963 or 4, I was making, quite a bit of money at that time for a commission salesman. I was the top salesman for the company, and I decided that I was called down by the Internal Revenue Service every year for probably from 1935 to 1966 on travel and entertainment, deduction on my tax return. And every year I'd go through the same procedure, and every year we'd negotiate. And it would cost me a certain amount of money in additional taxes. So I incorporated myself under a subchapter S corporation, and I was never called back. Did the same deductions, did the same expenses, did the same thing, did nothing change, except that I was never called again. As a corporation, you could do almost anything and not get called. So I became General Associates Incorporated instead of Jesse Rolnick. And I just